Hello students, welcome back to your botany class. And today I would like to start with a new unit, the plant physiology, with a new chapter, chapter 13, that is photosynthesis. So the two chapters preceding photosynthesis has been deleted for this year. So in this plant physiology, it includes photosynthesis, respiration, and plant growth regulators only for this year. Okay, so let's start with photosynthesis. We all know that the ultimate source of energy on the earth is the sun, and in an ecosystem, the green plants are considered as the autotrophs because they are the only organisms which can capture the sun's energy or radiant energy from the sun to synthesize food materials. And all the other organisms, be it animals or certain groups of microbes, they are dependent upon these autotrophs for their survival or for their nutritive needs. So this process by which green plants trap the light energy or the radiant energy from the sun and using simple molecules like carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil, and by the presence of the pigment chlorophyll on the leaves, prepare the food, and so this process is known as photosynthesis. So it is a process by which the green plants prepare food in the presence of light and the pigment chlorophyll, taking the simple molecules, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from the soil, by a biosynthetic process, converting the radiant energy into a chemical energy, that is carbohydrate, or stored as ATP, releasing oxygen and water in the process is known as photosynthesis. So this process of photosynthesis, which we are all versed, it takes place on the chloroplast. And the ultrastructure of chloroplast, we have discussed it in while studying with cytology. So this chloroplast is a type of plastid. And these are green colored plastid, and the green coloration of the chloroplast is due to pigment chlorophyll. So the presence of the pigment chlorophyll on the chloroplast gives its green coloration, and this is the major pigment chlorophyll which is responsible for carrying out the process of photosynthesis, during which radiant energy is converted into chemical energy. So chloroplast, we have discussed it as a double membrane structure or cell organelle, and it consists of an outer membrane, an inner membrane, then the membrane encloses a gel-like matrix known as the stroma, and in the stroma is the thylakoids. And the stroma are thylakoids, and these thylakoids are disc-like structures which are stacked upon one another, resembling a pile of cones, and these are known as the granum or grana. And the grana or granum, they are interconnected with one another through lamellar threads. Okay, so this is the ultrastructure of chloroplast that we have studied, and so these pigments which are responsible for carrying out the process of photosynthesis is present on the membrane of the thylakoids. It's present on the membrane of the thylakoids, and the membrane of thylakoids resemble the ultrastructure of plasma membrane. So we have studied that the plasma membrane consists of protein and phospholipids. So also the structure of or the membrane of thylakoids will also consist of protein and phospholipids. Proteins, it can be integral proteins or intrinsic proteins, and external proteins or extrinsic proteins. Okay, so now these pigments are present on the membrane of thylakoids. Besides this pigment chlorophyll, there are the major pigments, and there are 5 types of chlorophyll pigments: A, B, C, D, and E. So this pigment chlorophyll consists of 5 porphyrin rings and a phytol tail and a center magnesium. So it resembles something like this. So the pigment chlorophyll has 5 porphyrin rings and a phytol tail with a magnesium center. So there are 5 types of chlorophyll pigments: A, B, C, D, E. And of all these pigments, chlorophyll A is the major photosynthetic pigment, while the other pigments B, C, D, E, they are smaller in amount as compared to chlorophyll A, and they form the accessory pigments. So these pigments are present on the membrane of the thylakoids. These are not the only pigments that are present in plants or they help in photosynthesis. There are other pigments which are also known as carotenoids. And there are two major types of carotenoids. These are carotenes and xanthophylls. So besides chlorophyll, other pigments like carotenes and xanthophylls also take part in the process of photosynthesis. And these carotenes are red or orange pigment, and these xanthophylls are yellow pigments. So these carotenoids, which consist of carotenes and xanthophylls, they take part in the process of photosynthesis along with the pigment chlorophylls, and also they give coloration. The red, orange, and yellow, they give pig coloration to the fruits and the flowers of plants. So these are the pigments which takes part in the process of photosynthesis. So also there are other pigments like phycobilins. So these are the pigments which takes part in the process of photosynthesis, with chlorophyll A being the major pigment, and also chlorophyll A forms the reaction center, which we'll be discussing later. Okay, so this process of photosynthesis takes place on the chloroplast, and they are the green plastids. And these plastids or the chloroplast, they are majorly present on the leaves or the green parts of the plant, the stems or the leaves which are exposed to sunlight. And particularly the chloroplasts are present on the mesophyll cells of the leaf, and the number of chloroplasts in mesophyll cells can vary from 20 to 100 per cell. And these chloroplasts, they arrange themselves or align themselves along the walls of the cells so that they can trap the sun's energy and carry out the process of photosynthesis with maximum energy. Okay, so these pigments, chlorophyll, then carotenoids and phycobilins, they are not randomly. We have said that they are present on the membrane of the thylakoids, but these are not randomly arranged on the membrane. They are not randomly arranged, but they are arranged in certain groups or units. These are not randomly arranged, but they are organized into groups or units, and these group or units, they are known as, or the arrangement or a collection of the pigments. The pigments are not randomly arranged, but they are arranged in certain groups or units, and this group of units, they are termed as photosystem. So this photosystem is a collection of pigments, and in a photosystem, it consists of a chlorophyll A molecule which forms the reaction center, surrounded by the other pigments which are also called as the accessory pigments. So the pigment chlorophyll A forms the major pigment and also the reaction center, and this reaction center is surrounded by the other pigments or the accessory pigments. So whenever light falls on this pigments, the various type of pigments which surrounds the chlorophyll A, they absorb light of their respective wavelength. So the wavelength of light within which photosynthesis takes place is the visible light, which has a wavelength of 400 nanometers to 700 nanometers. So it is this, within this wavelength of light, where the process of photosynthesis is carried out, and different pigments absorb different wavelength of light within this range. And so these pigments which surrounds the reaction center, whenever light falls on it, they absorb light of their respective wavelength and transfer the energy, they absorb light energy to the reaction center, which is a chlorophyll A molecule, which is slightly bigger than the other pigments. And in the meantime, this chlorophyll A molecule also absorb light of its wavelength. And the process of photosynthesis takes place maximum in the red and blue region, while it is minimum in the green region. So these accessory pigments, they absorb wavelength of the respective wavelength, and also this chlorophyll A absorb light of its respective wavelength, and this energy which is passed from the accessory pigments to the chlorophyll A, and also the energy which this chlorophyll A absorbs by itself, is responsible for exciting and electron from the reaction center. So this reaction center, which absorbs, after getting the energy from the accessory pigments and as well as from the radiant energy absorbed by itself, becomes excited, activated, and in due course of time, a pair of electrons is released or exited from the reaction center. So the reaction starts from this chlorophyll A molecule. So that's why it's known as reaction center. So this electron which is exited from the reaction center is picked up by primary electron acceptor. So this primary electron acceptor, together with the reaction center, chlorophyll A, and the accessory pigments, they constitute a photosystem. This accessory pigments and chlorophyll A, they are also known as antenna molecules. So the accessory pigments, which absorb the radiant energy from the sun and transfer the energy to the reaction center, which is a chlorophyll A molecule, which is slightly bigger than the other accessory pigments, and the energy which the chlorophyll A absorbs is responsible for exiting an electron from the reaction center. So now this reaction center, after getting the sufficient amount of energy, releases a pair of electrons, and this electron moves to a higher energy level. It moves from its ground state to a higher energy level and is picked up by the first electron acceptor. That's why it is also called as primary electron acceptor. So this primary electron acceptor, the chlorophyll A molecule, and the accessory pigments constitute the photosystem. And there are two types of photosystem depending upon the type of the reaction, depending upon the type of chlorophyll A molecule which is present in the reaction center. So these are photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. So PS1 and photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. So in case of photosystem 1, as I have said, this chlorophyll also absorb light of its respective, with all the pigments, they absorb light of their own respective pigment wavelength, and so also this chlorophyll absorb light in the wavelength, having a wavelength 680 to 700 nanometer. So a chlorophyll pigment may absorb light within this wavelength or within this wavelength. So depending upon the wavelength absorbed by the chlorophyll A, which is present in the reaction center, there are two types of photosystem, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. In photosystem 1, the reaction center is a chlorophyll A molecule which absorbs light at a wavelength of 700 nanometers. And in case of photosystem 2, the chlorophyll A, which forms the reaction center, absorbs light at a wavelength of 680 nanometers. So these are the two types of photosystem depending upon the type of chlorophyll A molecule absorbing the type of wavelength. Okay, so in both the system, whether it's photosystem 1 or photosystem 2, the accessory pigments transfer the absorbed energy to the reaction center, and also at the same time, the reaction center absorbs radiant energy from the sun, and it releases a pair of electrons. And so this pair of electrons is picked up by the first primary electron acceptor, or first electron acceptor, which is also known as primary electron acceptor. Now, from this point, from this primary electron acceptor, the electron continues its journey through a series of electron carriers. Okay, so from this primary electron acceptor, the electron continues its journey. It passes through a series of electron acceptors, and these electron acceptors, they are at a lower energy level, or the electron travels down the gradient. So as it travels down the gradient, the electron releases its energy. So in due course of its journey down the gradient, the electron, which is high energy, it releases its energy, and that energy is used for the synthesis of ATP from ADP and Pi. So this, as the electron passes through this gradient of electron pairs, it releases energy, and that energy which is released by the electrons is used for the formation or synthesis of ATP from ADP and PI. ADP means adenosine diphosphate, PI means inorganic phosphate. So addition of a phosphate group to adenosine diphosphate results in the formation of adenosine triphosphate. And so it continues its journey again, and depending upon whether this electron which is released by the reaction center, this electron is initially released by the reaction center. So depending upon whether this electron will come back again to the reaction center, or it will be given up by another, or it will be received by another photosystem, there are two types of photophosphorylation. So these are cyclic and non-cyclic photophosphorylation. What is photophosphorylation? So photo means light, and phosphorylation means addition of a phosphate group. So this formation of ATP, the formation of ATP, the light-driven formation of ATP in due course of the journey of electron down the gradient is known as photophosphorylation. The light-driven synthesis of ATP from ADP and PI is known as photophosphorylation, and depending whether this pair of electrons comes back to the reaction center or it will be received by another photosystem, there are two types of photophosphorylation. Cyclic photophosphorylation, when the electron comes back to the reaction center or to the position where it was initially released, and non-cyclic photophosphorylation, where this pair of electrons will be picked up by another photosystem. So this is the concept of the flow of electrons, which will lead into the detailed mechanism of ATP. So this ATP synthesis will be studied detailedly in the next class, and this is one of the accelerotory powers that is synthesized during the flow of electrons. So in the next class, we will discuss about the phases of photosynthesis. It takes place in two phases, light phase and dark phase. Light phase takes place on the thylakoids, and the dark phase takes place on the stroma. And the light phase is concerned with the formation of assimilatory powers like ATP and NADPH, and the actual reduction of carbon dioxide takes place in the dark reaction. So the two phases, that is the light phase, which is concerned with the formation of ATP and NADPH, which takes place on the thylakoids, while the dark phase, which is the actual reduction of this carbon dioxide to this carbohydrate, takes place on the stroma. So these are the two phases where the light phase and the dark phase will be studied detailedly in the next class. So please come back again.